Hey, it's Misty, and this is your video review for Unit 3, the medieval period. Now, first things first, you should recall that the medieval period begins with the fall of the western half of the Roman Empire. Okay, so the fall of the Roman Empire is where we start the Middle Ages. And the fall of the Roman Empire means that there is no more central government. There is no government to maintain law and order, and Europe is overrun by Germanic tribes. These nomadic Germanic tribes run through Europe, and the cities are abandoned. They're not safe, so people end up going to the countryside, and the knowledge of Greece and Rome is lost. The Germanic tribes are illiterate. There's no effort to really maintain any of that knowledge. That it's all basically lost. All right. And the people, as we said, they abandon the cities and they end up going to the countryside. And what develops is a system known as manorialism. So, what does that mean? The people live on manors. You should remember this from the worksheet we did, that you have these groups of people and they turn to very strong, powerful people and they say, hey, listen, I need safety, I need protection. Let me stay behind your walls, offer me protection, and in exchange, I will work the land for you. I will do all the farm work. You can have whatever I produce from the land. In exchange, provide me protection. And this develops into manorialism. So the people at the bottom of the society, the people with the least power and the least wealth, those are the people who work the land. Those are the serfs. They are the agricultural workforce. They're the ones doing the farmland. And remember, they're tied to the land. They can't even leave if they wanted to. They can't move. They work day in and day out. And what they produce, they turn over to the Lord. The Lord or the noble, the aristocrat, that is the person who owns the land. And remember, under this system, the most important economic resource you can own is land. It's not money, it's land. You can't even buy or sell land. Whoever has land, that translates into wealth, it translates into power, it translates into social status, all right? So the lords are the landowners. Now, to maintain that safety and security, the lords have knights. The knights are the warrior class. They are the ones. Again, you do not have a central government. You do not have an army that protects the lands. Instead, each lord must maintain their own military force. And that military force, those warriors, those are the knights. And while we are looking at feudalism as it exists in Europe, remember it is not limited to Europe. Europe has a manorial system. It has a system known as what we call feudalism. That's another word. Sometimes you'll see them used interchangeably, or sometimes manorialism is when they look at it as from an economic standpoint. And feudalism is sometimes the word that they use when they talk about it as a social class system. Translates into the same thing. It's the same idea because in the social classes, it works the same way as the economic system. The people at the bottom who do the most work, who have the least status, at the bottom of the barrel, those are the serfs. Above them are the knights who, do the work of protecting and fighting. Above them are the nobility. And then above the nobility, that's the king. The king is the most powerful noble, like the landowner. Having land gives you economic wealth, but also gives you social status. So this is this system of feudalism where everybody has a specific role in society and they have certain obligations that come with that role. Okay. And your status is established at birth. Now, on the left, that picture on the left, that is what feudalism looks like in Europe. But they also have feudalism in Japan, and it looks very, very similar. It's almost the same thing. All right. Again, the people at the bottom, those are the ones who do the work. Japanese feudalism is slightly different just because they put merchants at the very bottom, and then the peasant farmers have a little higher status. Again, in Europe, you don't even have a merchant class because the cities are basically abandoned, especially in that early medieval period. Japan was a little different. But, above these working people, you have, just like you have it in Europe, above the working class, now you have the military class. You have your warriors. In Europe, the warriors are knights. In Japan, the warriors are the samurai. And above the samurai work and protect the lord. They protect their nobles. In Japan, those land-owning nobility, they are known as the daimyo. So in Japan, the landowner is a daimyo. In Europe, the landowner is a noble. And finally, at the very top, in Europe, you have a king. But in Japan, it's a little different. They have a shogun. The shogun is basically a military dictator, so he has all the political power. But they do have a figurehead um, that is the emperor. The emperor is considered a god, so he maintains status, but he doesn't really do a lot of the day-to-day ruling. In Europe, it's a little different because in addition to this feudal system, this government system, religion is handled separately by the Catholic Church. And we're going to take a look at that. Actually, we're going to take a look at that next. All right. So in Europe, the religion is Christianity, specifically Catholicism, Roman Catholicism. And basically, everybody in Europe is the same religion virtually. There's Orthodox Christianity, but they're all Christian, right? And the head of the Roman Catholic Church, okay, so the Roman Catholic Church, which is what is the religion of Western Europe. The Pope is the head of the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church is the closest thing you have to a central authority. So although you do not have a central government, the church kind of steps in a sense, because it is the church that is the only one that's in a position to offer educational systems, to offer social services. So what I mean, again, social, whenever you hear social, think people. So it's basically services to help people. So for example, if you are poor, for example, if you have a widow who her husband died and she's now impoverished, she could go to the church and the church might give her, alms, might give her, help and aid. Because there's no government to do that. There's no government to open up schools or to support learning. The only one that's available to do that is the church. The church is the only one that has, the people who can read and write basically work for the church, or church, monks or something like that. And again, the Catholic Church has a lot of power based on the fact that everyone in Europe is basically Catholic. And remember, if you're a Catholic, you're going to give tithes, which means you're going to give money towards your church to support your church. The church ends up being very, very rich. It's, the biggest landowner in Europe and all that. So with all that wealth, with all that power, the people who are the head of the church are generally also the same people that we saw at the top of the feudalism triangle. So basically, it's those noble families that are going to be the ones who will be at the head of the church. So your popes, your bishops, your cardinals, all these top church officials will also be from the nobility. Now, how powerful is the Catholic Church? Well, the church is so powerful that when the Pope says, "Hey guys, I need you to make a trip to the Holy Land to get back Jerusalem," all the Catholics are like, "Okay." And that's it. That's how we get the Crusades. The Crusades is basically what happens. It's basically a holy war. I mean, let's be real. The Pope sends Catholics on a pilgrimage, so he's allowed to ask them to go take this trip to the Middle East with the goal of getting the Holy Land, which is Jerusalem, back from the Muslims. All right. And you're not going to get that by knocking on their door and asking. So he knows he's going to send them there to kill people and to fight. And what happens is the Pope even says, if you go on crusade and something happens to you and you die, you'll go instantly to heaven. So, I mean, there's a lot of religious motivation for people to go. And like I said, people walk to the Holy Land. Some serfs are dying to get off the manor, and they end up going on this. They go on a crusade. Remember, there's not just even one. There's 8 different crusades. Okay, there's a number of different popes who call again and again and again. There's 8 different wars, and all to get back Jerusalem, and all of them fail. I think the one that the Christians won, but every single other one they lost. So the wars, the Crusades, these wars, as a military exercise, that they're really not that important. The Christians get their butts kicked. All right, the Catholics fail. The Muslims hold on to Jerusalem. They don't win a thing. What's really important about the Crusades is the effects. Because what happens is you have all these Europeans suddenly traveling to the Middle East and suddenly leaving. During that medieval period, that early medieval period, people stayed on the manor. The manors were self sufficient. People did not leave Europe. There was very little trade, very little contact. Europe was really isolated. But with the Crusades, that isolation starts to come to an end, where you have many people from Europe traveling to the Middle East, trying new foods, getting access to new books and new ideas. And that contact, what happens is Italy had been in the perfect position, had a lot of ships, did a lot of shipping. It's a huge peninsula, that Italian peninsula. A lot of the city states in Italy end up being the ones that take the Crusaders from Europe and transports them to the Middle East. And those journeys to take the Crusaders to the Middle East end up becoming trade routes. And so the Italian city states, so that's like Florence and Venice and Genoa and things, they are best positioned to become very, very powerful, very wealthy towns and cities. And these towns and cities grow thanks to an increase in trade between Europe and the Middle East that comes as a result of these crusades. All right. Just to again revisit Japan, I already mentioned to you earlier that in addition to European feudalism, there's also feudalism in Japan. And again, looks very, very similar from a social class perspective. Again, the people with the most wealth, with the most power, the most important thing you can own is land. That's the key commodity in the medieval times. So in Europe, the landowner is a lord. In feudal Japan, that is the daimyo. In Europe, we have warriors known as knights. In Japan, the warriors are known as samurai. The other interesting thing to know about Japan is that during this feudal period, Japan is going to choose a policy of isolationism. The government decides to cut itself off from the rest of the world. And that is, in some ways it's positive and in some ways it's negative. They're, by cutting themselves off from the rest of the world, they can isolate their society from influences that might cause fights and might cause war. For example, Christianity. When you introduce a new religion to an area, religion is something that can cause people to fight. So when you don't allow this religion to come, you isolate yourself, you keep your society more peaceful in a way. It's less things to fight over. And in fact, this period of feudal Japan, where it's during this period of isolationism, the government is very, very stable. And they're able to develop a very unique, purely Japanese culture because they are isolated from other influences. All right. And again, they take this very seriously. The government very much is very strongly, I mean, they pass laws that if a Japanese person leaves Japan and comes back, they'll kill you. They'll literally execute you. That's how important this policy of isolationism, that's how seriously they took it. You get the death penalty for bringing in outside ideas. And isolationism is not an easy thing to pull off. I mean, you guys know Donald Trump is dying to isolate America from people from Mexico and Central America, and he would love it if he could isolate America and keep these other people out. And it's really hard when you got a big, long border with another country. It's very hard to cut yourself off. But Japan is a different story. If you take a look at the map, Japan is what you would call like an island nation. It's actually really an archipelago. It's a collection of islands. But just the idea that it is separate from the mainland. And when you're an island like that, when you're a group of islands like that, it is much easier to maintain isolationism. Much, much easier. So geography lends itself to Japan cutting off access to other people and to other ideas and eliminating cultural diffusion to prevent cultural diffusion. All right, so we're talking about the Middle Ages. Traditionally, a lot of people would think of the Middle Ages, and they always think of it as a dark age. And that's because they think about the European experience, because the European experience is you go from like the glory of the Roman Empire, which was a time of great art and great science and great learning. And with the fall of the Roman Empire, with the start of the medieval period, this is a time where there's a loss of learning, where there's a loss of kind of cultural expression and things like that. So for Europe, it's not a high point for Europe. However, very different story in other parts of the world. In other parts of the world, this is absolutely a period, a golden age. This is a very positive cultural, scientific, a period of great cultural and scientific achievement. So some of the places we looked at were the Islamic Empire again in the Middle East, the Gupta Empire in India, the Tang and Song dynasties in China, the Mongol Empire, which extends through the majority with like almost all of Asia and into Europe, and finally the Ottoman Empire, which is again centered in the Middle East, but it covers three different continents. All right, so first things first, we're going to take a look at the Islamic Empire. And to understand the Islamic Empire, the first thing we need to do is understand the religion of Islam. Now, the religion of Islam starts in Saudi Arabia, and it is founded by Muhammad. Muhammad was born in Mecca, and that's a city in Saudi Arabia. Um, since this isn't a religion class and this is a social studies class, we're just going to jump into um, basically, long story short, um, with Islam, some of the most important rules of Islam are considered under the five pillars of Islam. We're not going to get into all of them. From a social studies perspective, the most important pillars of Islam, the ones that you hear about most often, are the fact that people have to fast during Ramadan. That means during the celebration of Ramadan, which takes about a month, you're not allowed to eat during sunup. So that's one thing. It's also one of the other ones is that you have to pray 5 times a day towards the city of Mecca. So Muslims have to pray 5 times a day towards the city of towards Mecca, no matter where they are on earth. And finally, all Muslims are expected to at least once in their lifetime, unless like just economically or health wise, it's impossible. But if it's at all possible, all Muslims are expected to make a pilgrimage or Hajj, which means basically a trip, to the city of Mecca. That all Muslims are expected to make a pilgrimage to Mecca. All right, so the religion of Islam, as I said, starts in Saudi Arabia, which on this map you can see it's that dark brown area. And Muhammad is not just a religious leader, he's also a political leader because Muhammad unites the Arab people of Saudi Arabia, and he's the one who starts this Islamic empire. And this empire will grow to cover 3 continents, to include 3 continents: Asia, Africa, and Europe. Now, what's interesting is as you could see on the map, um, a good chunk, it starts in that Middle East, in that Asian area, Asia, and then it goes to the north of Africa, and then it comes up to Spain. So Spain is part of Europe, but Spain will be very different than most parts of Europe. As I just got finished explaining, that for most of Europe, um, this is a period where, it's considered like a dark age where there isn't much science or knowledge and things like that. Spain is a very different story. Spain, because it is part of the Islamic Empire, has access to Islamic learning and knowledge and science. So you see today there's a huge influence. You can see the Islamic influence in Spanish architecture, the way they build their buildings, like the decor that they use a lot of tile work, literature, and science. Uh, the cities of Spain were the most advanced cities in all of Europe during that period. But in addition to what you see in the map before you, Islam will, as a religion, of course, extends way past just the Islamic Empire. It will continue to expand. You guys know, we talked about it many times. One of the most famous Muslims we talked about is Mansa Musa. Remember? Mansa Musa, the Muslim from Mali who makes a pilgrimage to Mecca, right? And who's got lots and lots of money. Um, Mansa Musa, of course, is from Mali. It's a West African kingdom. And through the trade networks, because it ends up Islam ends up spreading to Africa as well as other parts of the world. And you got to remember, Muslim traders. The Middle East is it's called the Middle East because it's right in the middle. It's right in the middle of Africa, Asia, Europe. And very often, these Islamic traders had contact with lots of people, thanks to the Silk Road, thanks to Indian Ocean trade, and what have you. Um, and so, through these trade contacts, you get cultural diffusion. And one of the ideas that's going to spread via trade, via cultural diffusion, is this religion of Islam. That's why today people practice Islam all over the world. All right, and it spreads very, very far. Um, and in addition, it also spreads via conquest. What happens is, in addition to the Islamic Empire, you also have the Ottoman Empire, which we're going to talk about later. There's also the Safavid Empire and the Mughal Empire, which again we'll also talk about in later units. But long story short, these are four empires that are all Islamic. And so, by definition, as these empires conquer new territories and expand into new areas, by definition, they're going to expose more and more people to their religion, and that's going to cause the religion to spread to more people, to more areas. All right, so the Islamic Empire, as soon as you hear Islamic Empire, you got to think science, technology, medicine, very, very advanced society, very, very advanced society. Um, the city of Baghdad, which was the capital of the Islamic Empire, is known as the city of wisdom because the leaders wanted, knowledgeable people. They welcomed scholars from all over. They welcomed Jews. They welcomed Christian scholars to come to the city and to learn. They collected books and knowledge from all over the world. They actually preserved the knowledge of Greece and Rome. A lot of historians have argued that if it wasn't for the Islamic Empire, a lot of the great works of ancient Greece and ancient Rome would have been lost. But these scholars collected these works, translated these works, and actually added to them. So they would comment on them and add new ideas and build on the ideas that had already started from Greece and Rome. And during this early era of the Islamic Empire, there was no conflict between science and religion. The belief was is the more you learn, the closer it would bring you to Allah. That's no longer the case. Today it's a little different, but back then, no conflict. And um, again, the advances made in math, science, and medicine, particularly, you guys should recall the astrolabe and the lantern sail, just as two examples of some of the things developed during in the golden age of Islam that end up opening the door to the age of exploration. All right, that we're really focused on in Unit 4. All right, in addition to the Islamic Empire, the other empire that is really well known for advances in math, science, learning, in medicine as well, is the Gupta Empire. The Gupta Empire is in India. The Gupta follows the Mauryan Empire. Now, if you recall, the Mauryan Empire is most known for the leader Asoka, who converts to Buddhism. So, under Asoka, Buddhism became a pretty popular religion in India. But the Gupta actually go the other direction. The Gupta suppress Buddhism and support Hinduism. That's why today in India, Buddhism is a very small religion. It's a very small minority religion. Buddhism is much bigger in China and Japan than it ever is in India. India, it's very small. Most of people in India are Hindu. And that's thanks to, at least in part, to the work of the Gupta Empire. So they restore Hinduism. Um, Also, again, it's very advanced in math and science. This is the Gupta Empire has the decimal system. They come up with pi, zero. There's advanced medicine. I forgot if I told you guys, but that see the guy, the picture on top. He's actually doing plastic surgery. They can like fix your nose. Astronomy. So this is another civilization that has a lot of arts and science. So usually, if you're not sure which is which, usually if you hear algebra, that's Islamic. Decimals, Gupta. Zero, Gupta. Um, that's usually the way they divide it. Oh, you see a reference to Spain, Islamic. Okay. Um, then, okay, so we'll move on to China. We're going to look at the Tang and Song dynasties. Um, and again, it's this is China has always been um, throughout history coming up with really innovative technologies, new discoveries that you, finally that when they leave China and they make their way to the rest of the world are really revolutionary. Um, during the Tang and Song dynasties, you go from you could see the picture at the top. That picture is block printing. So you would carve out a block of wood and then you could apply ink and now you could start printing. They actually take it further to what we call movable type printing. So that's what's just below it. So now you can rearrange the blocks to make new messages. Now, this is unbelievable because remember in Europe, they have very few books. And if you want to have a book in Europe, you got to write it by hand. Every single book, any piece of writing has to be done by hand. So it takes months. This innovation to be able to do this kind of printing where you apply ink and boom, 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 and you're printing things out, you're able to print things very much more quickly. So when this technology makes its way to Europe, it's going to revolutionize Europe. All right, so just bear that in mind. But that movable type printing starts in China. Another, and again, I'm sure you guys remember, another unbelievably important invention that starts in China that's going to revolutionize the world is gunpowder. They're the ones who invent it. They start using it as a tool for warfare. As you can see, they started with rockets. But later, other civilizations are going to pick it up, especially like in the Middle East. They're going to really use it to develop the latest in cannons. You're going to start seeing guns. But it really starts here in China. Next is porcelain. That's a type of really, really fine, fine pottery. If you ever see clay is kind of reddish, porcelain isn't. Porcelain is really thin, white, beautiful. Like this porcelain that's developed in China ends up becoming something that everybody wants, and a lot of Europeans trade for it and things. Makes them a lot of money, that one. And finally, the Tang and Song dynasties are smart enough to really copy a good thing. They copy the Han dynasty. They maintain what the Han dynasty had. If you remember, the Han dynasty is the one that adopted Confucianism as the the system that it was going to use to maintain social order. That Confucianism was the ethical system that the government was going to be based on. And that's something that starts with the Han Dynasty. And you remember, the Han Dynasty decided not only was it going to run its government based on Confucian principles, but they also start a civil service exam where if you want to work for the government, you have to first pass an exam to prove that you know Confucianism. And only after passing that exam can you get a job in the government. That starts with the Han Dynasty. And when the Han Dynasty falls, there's a period of, a little chaotic or whatever. But then the the Tang Dynasty and later Song Dynasty are going to come back and they reestablish the use of Confucianism. They reestablish the use of the civil service exams, and they take that good part of that those great lessons from the Han Dynasty and they maintain it. Okay, the Mongols is another group that does very well under the medieval period. They're a little different than your traditional society. The Mongols don't build great buildings or, have great art and science. They just kick a lot of butt. I mean, let's be real. They are unreal when it comes to warfare. As you can see in the map, under the reign of Genghis Khan, they basically take over much of Asia, and then under his heirs, they go even further. They take almost there's just like a couple of small spots with India, just a little bit of Southeast Asia they don't get, but they really take over almost. And by the way, the part on top that they don't take, that's like a frozen wasteland. Some people just give that to the Mongols anyway because nobody's living there. It's so cold. It's like literally a frozen tundra. So some people just to throw that into the Mongol Empire as well. But they extend it not only into Asia, but then also into Eastern Europe. But they have almost the entire continent. That's crazy. Just one end of the continent to the other. Um, and the reason they're able to do it is because they may not have great art and great science and great books, but they are great at kicking butt. They use the stirrup, as you can see from the picture. These were skilled horsemen. Like on the back of a horse, they were deadly. They were great on horseback. Again, they use the stirrup. If you remember, that's the thing. If you look closely at that picture, where the guy has a shoe into that little piece of metal that holds his foot onto the horse, that is the stirrup. That gives them a much steadier ride on their horses. That the fact that they used the crossbow, they used siege warfare. So, I mean, even the Mongols who came from the steppes of Asia that had never seen a castle before end up working out strategies to take on these great castles and walled manors and all that from Europe. They learned how to conquer those places too. They're unreal. Um, and once they take over this area, this huge, massive area, again, from Eastern Europe all the way through Asia, um, this ushers in what's called the Pax Romana, the Pax Romana. Oh, sorry, Pax Romana. Pax Romana was the one under Roman Empire. Pax Mongolia. Sorry, excuse me. Pax Mongolia. And Pax Mongolia, like the Pax Romana, is basically a time where, because there is a strong central government, you have a time of peace and stability. So having this huge area under the control of the Mongols ushers in an era of peace and stability. There's one group in charge, they call the shots, they keep law and order. And as part of that, um, there's a lot of cultural diffusion throughout their empire. The Mongols were very quick to take, if somebody in one part of the empire was good at something, they would take that person and move them to another part of the empire and move people around the empire to do different jobs. So there's lots of cultural diffusion through this empire. In addition, there's also a lot of trade going on. Remember, the Mongols do not manufacture their own weapons. They're not ones to build their own things. So they count on trade to have other cultures, other people build and create for them. So they're big believers in trade. They support trade. And as a result, they get the Silk Road. The Silk Road becomes safe to use again. The Silk Road had been the main thoroughfare for trade under when the Roman Empire existed, but with the fall of the Roman Empire, the use of the Silk Road became very unsafe. So now, with it under Mongol control, people start using the Silk Road again, um, and it increases trade, which is nice. Problem is that is also going to lead to the spread of disease. Okay. And as you may recall, the opening of the Silk Road and the use of the Silk Road ends up leading to the spread of the Black Death, otherwise known as the bubonic plague. Bubonic plague is actually what the disease is. The Black Death is like the nickname. And it spreads because of trade routes. It starts in China, but thanks to the Pax Mongolia, there's a lot of contact between China and the rest of the world through trade. And so, what they think is that a lot of the rats that were on board a lot of the ships, the fleas that lived on those rats had the bubonic plague, and they ended up spreading it to a lot of the people of Europe. And it kills about 1/3 of the population of Europe. It's no joke. There were so many people who were dead, they didn't have enough people to bury the bodies. They would literally leave stacks of dead bodies. And if you recall from the video, 1/3 of Europe doesn't mean 1, 2 dead, 1, 2 dead. It means there were some cities where you were okay if you didn't have a lot of contact. One city might, have very few or no deaths. But then you'd go to a city like Florence and 90% of the population dies in the entire city. That's very common. Urban areas are always worse hit with disease. There's just, you're living in tighter quarters, you have more contact with others, there's very little space, you're more likely to spread the disease. So it really does a number on the towns and cities. The Black Death really, it doesn't matter. It really messes up the towns and cities. It spreads it kills off a lot of the people of Europe. And as a result, killing off all those people, it creates labor shortages. So that really helps weaken feudalism, because now serfs are not forced to stay on the manor. They know they can leave the manor and go into the cities and find jobs because they're desperate for workers. So it really changes the power dynamic. The labor becomes much more valuable because of the Black Death. All right, so next, we're just going to revisit the Byzantine Empire real quick. You should recall the Byzantine Empire was the eastern half of the Roman Empire, and at its at its largest, it surrounded the entire Mediterranean Sea. But it is going to come to an end by 1450. It is very, very tiny. As you can see in that little square map that I have in the middle, it's basically down to that little purple section. Like the rest of the empire had been chipped away, chipped away, chipped away by the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire basically conquers most of the Byzantine Empire um, until you're basically only left with the city of Constantinople. And Constantinople, you should recall, was very, very, very safe just based on geography. On three sides, it's surrounded by water, and then it had on its one vulnerable side, it had this really thick wall that nobody could get through. But what happens and again, oh, sorry, it's a center of trade, you should remember, because of its location. It's right in the center of Europe, Africa, Asia. It was very, very wealthy city. And being the eastern half of the Roman Empire, they were the ones to maintain and hold on to the knowledge of Greece and Rome. Because, I mean, they were the eastern half of the Roman Empire. They should know what happened in the Roman Empire. All right. So, like I said, it had been a very powerful empire, but by the 1450s, it starts getting weaker and weaker and weaker. But it still maintains the city of Constantinople based on its geography, based on that wall. But all that ends with the Ottoman Empire. And you should remember it is the Ottoman Empire that ends up being able to break through the wall because of new technology. Gunpowder developed in China is going to be able to power a new cannon. This is a cannon that was specifically designed just to break through this walls of Constantinople. And this is what really puts the Ottoman Empire on the map. The Ottoman Empire had been a little smaller and things like that, but by destroying Constantinople, this is what really makes the Ottoman Empire powerful. Really makes them a player on the world stage. This is what sets them apart as a very powerful empire, is the fact that they conquer Constantinople, a city that stood for 1,000 years and nobody could break through their walls. The Ottomans did. Um, and the fall of Constantinople, it's argued by many historians, it helped kick off the age of exploration, because now you lost that trading center. That area of Constantinople no longer exists, and so there's a push to find alternate trade routes, ones that would not require Europe to trade with the people of the Middle East, and try to cut out that middleman and try to reach India and try to reach China without passing through the Middle East. So trying to find new sea routes. Anyway, so they were able to conquer the Byzantine Empire. The city is renamed, so it is no longer known as Constantinople. Today, if you look on a map, that city is now Istanbul. And the Ottoman Empire continues to grow. And it grows, it becomes a very, very large, powerful empire. Again, you could see the map in the middle there. This is another three-continent empire. It extends from it starts in the Middle East. That's where its capital city is, right? But then extends into Europe, extends into Asia, and extends into North Africa. So very powerful empire that lasts until World War I, actually. So very long-lasting empire. All right, and with that, you are done. As long as you know everything on this video, you should be in good shape for your exam. I will be available on Monday for extra help if you need me during our class period, which is and Tuesday for my other class. But all right, with that, I will let you guys go. Good luck.